The Florida Department of Law Enforcement is kind of a special case because at the time, in 1984, when we started in 1984, I was the head of our research group here at Stowe Architecture and the Institute for Building Sciences. I was the director. And we had this opportunity come up from the Department of Law Enforcement where they contacted us and said, we want the School of Architecture to help us get a new building. We've been struggling in these temporary buildings spread out around town. They had 3 buildings near the Envision on Adams across the street. One is now a condominium development. And they had these buildings, they didn't own the buildings, they were leasing them, and there was a tremendous number of problems with that because the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, this was the headquarters for the department, really needed a lot of things that couldn't be provided. So they had tried for many years to get the legislature to fund a new building for the Florida Department of Law Enforcement with no success. Nobody wanted to spend taxpayers' money to build a new headquarters facility. So Bob Dempsey, who was the Commissioner of Law Enforcement for Florida at the time, came to us and said, you guys need to help us out. Here's my idea. I want to force the legislature to give us money. And I want to force them by, and he was a tough guy, he's Commissioner of Law Enforcement, former policeman from Miami. Anyway, he said, I'm going to force them to do it by threatening to do it myself without them, and take it to the point where they have to either let me do it or give me the money and do it through the normal channels, with an appropriation from the legislature and so on and so forth. And so we said, sure, we'll help you, because it seemed like a good idea. And so the idea was that it would become a turnkey project, a design-build project, a private sector project that would be a lease purchase back to the state, to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, so that they would have this new facility. And instead of paying the rent that they were paying to these several inadequate buildings spread around, they would pay it to this developer who develops the building, and their lease payments would go towards purchasing the building. And so the first thing we did was put together a request for proposals that went out. Well, first thing we did actually was develop the programming for the facility. And that was a team that I headed with Ron Lumpkin as a student researcher, Tom Deckert as a student researcher, Bob Lamison, who was the campus planner at the time and an architect. He was a consultant to us. And we had engineering consultants, and we had a pretty good team put together. And so Tom Deckert and I met with all of the top brass at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, starting with the commissioner and all of the directors and people. And we did an analysis of their existing facility. Now, I can't show you any of this stuff because we were told that a lot of this can't be public information because, and this is before 9/11, this is early 1980s, but they were still concerned because they were in the midst of a big fight with organized crime in South Florida. And they didn't want their headquarters building to be too public. That's what they're doing, what kind of functions do they have in the building, what's the configuration of the building, how easily can you take someone out, who's standing at a window, that kind of thing. So we worked with them for quite a long time, developing a very detailed program, which I have here. And now that I've shown you this, I'm going to have to kill all of you. So anyway, we went to the point of developing the program. There's a couple of passages I want to just quickly read to you because it very much relates to what you're doing. And this one is on the image or appearance of the buildings. And this is what the Florida Department of Law Enforcement wanted, and everything had to go through policy review committees, and it was very official. It was sort of like working, like I had experienced this before when I did a lot of work with the military. So this is what they wanted. The department wishes to convey to the community an image of permanence, substance, warmth, and accessibility. Now that's not the same thing that you would find these days, particularly for embassies and other government buildings. In other words, the complex should avoid the appearance of being a large, anonymous, impersonal organization that cares little about its community or constituency. The facility should also reflect the responsible use of public funds in every way. Although the complex must be built from high-quality, durable materials, it should avoid the use of expensive materials merely for their visual appearance. The department also wishes to avoid the obvious appearance of a high-security environment. Security provisions should be unobtrusive whenever possible. In summary, the proposed facility should respect its historical, social, and physical context to the fullest extent possible by being a good neighbor. So that was a statement that I wrote, and it was modified and went through committees and stuff. That ended up being sort of the guiding principle for the architect to use when developing the concept for the building. The architect was Ivan Johnson Peterson Associates. And some of you have Ivan in class, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, we worked with his office, and they were the architect. Another statement I just want to read. So that was sort of, in summary, in a nutshell, what they intended the building to be as an image or as a reflection of, what the architect should be striving for. And then the other statement in here that I put in that was well received was provisions for internal flexibility and external growth. And you can see that sort of on my pet topics. As is typical of any governmental office complex, there is a need over the life of the building for extensive rearrangement of space assignments with a minimum of disruption and cost. On the other hand, investment in expensive movable or removable partition systems is not recommended, as they may never be moved and or may no longer be available at some future date. That theory being that if you buy one of these fancy systems that you can get from different suppliers of systems, they tend to, interestingly enough, they tend to redesign them every so often and throw out all the old ones. And then if you want to add a panel, you have to throw all your panels out and get all new panels, which never makes sense to me. A more viable alternative is to provide the buildings with a predetermined grid of potential partition wall locations. The initial need for space divisions is best met with an economical, easily replaced wall system, i.e. steel studs with gypsum board. So just going with the traditional drywall wall. Interior load-bearing walls should be avoided, as well as a large number of closely spaced interior columns. Of greatest importance to the potential for economical future rearrangement of space is the air, electrical, lighting, and communication distribution system selected. Flexibility in communication distribution must be provided in all of the initial design, the departmental plans, to implement total office automation in the near future. So what we were trying to do there is guide the architect a little bit in terms of the design of the building and how it should be thought of as a system. It's thought of as a complex that isn't carefully tailored around every one of these spaces, but there's sort of a more generic attitude about space. And so there were other statements like the quality materials statement. The required quality of materials to be used in the construction of the proposed facility, and there's a description, a whole section on that. As mentioned, the materials that are economical yet render long service are favored. It is particularly important for the building to be provided provided with highly reliable and efficient heating, ventilating, and cooling systems. Other areas of critical importance are ease of maintenance and durability of all interior exterior finishes, performance and reliability of all security hardware, including relevant doors and windows, the quality and reliability of electrical and communication, the quality and durability of all roof areas. Now, I haven't kept up with what's happened. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the buildings that are over there on Mississippi and Blairstone. It's just, Johnson Peterson pretty faithfully followed this design guideline in designing the buildings. Because what we suggested is it's better to have a series of smaller buildings connected with courtyards in between and so on, and that they be based upon a flexible grid, and that they be no more than a two-story buildings, and so on and so forth. And they follow that. If you go there and look at the buildings, that's exactly what the buildings are. What happened with the funding of the project and the legislature was, once the Department of Public Works or the General Services Administration or whatever that department was called at the time, it's changed a few different times, saw that this was actually going to go ahead, and that it looked like we were going to go ahead and get a good response from developers, that they were really interested in doing this project, and that this was going to end up not being a government-owned facility initially. They sort of panicked and had a special session or emergency session of the legislature and voted for funding for the project. And so the commissioner was exactly right. He anticipated what would happen. His strategy for basically muscling his way through the process and worked out great, because then it shifted from being the kind of project that we were pushing to being just a standard government building funded through general appropriations. And so when they did hire the architect, it was a standard process, and they hired the architect through that process. And it was kind of at the last minute. There was some brinksmanship here, where it was literally like the week before we were going to put the RFP out. We had this document. This was never this whole document was developed with the idea that it was going to be a turnkey design build, private project, lease purchase project. And because, I guess, partly because of how thorough this project was and how it all seemed to be very feasible, and it looked like there was no reason why it wouldn't go ahead, that they finally saw the light and decided that this would be much better if this was a government building right from the start and not a private building. There were all kinds of war stories about going through and learning about what they do on a day-to-day basis, getting really familiar with all the operations of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, which I had the opportunity to do. And there were a few moments when I was really unsure of what to do, because when I don't know if I've told you this particular war story, I lose track after a while, but when I was in practice in Canada, I was hired by the mafia. I was hired by the mafia to develop both a men's club, which you know what mafia men's clubs are.
It's Canada, it's a nice mafia.
Yeah. No, this was the Miami Mafia. Toronto branch. They're connected. There's a connection. I'm not saying. Anyway, we worked for this guy whose name was Stan Fellini. And he owned this business where he would do this typical. He wasn't doing garbage collection like these Toronto, but he was doing sewer lines and street projects. And so he had, anyway, he was someone I'd gotten to know really well, and some of his associates. So here I am at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, and I'm walking through the different rooms, and I go to the organized crime unit. And I walk into this room, and there's this giant wall with a big, like, family tree on the wall. And you can see all the, there's the Gambini family and all these people, and all the connections and all the people. And there I see the guy. My guy. And I'm sitting with him. Should I mention, oh yeah, I know that guy, I know where he lives, and I know his wife. I thought, well, maybe I would be disqualified from this project. They would no longer want me to be the programmer. So you always have to be careful with your programming a building.
In case you know a criminal.
Because, there may be something that happens that you don't expect. It only happened to me one other time when I was programming a prison. And I was walking past a cell block, and I'm with the warden, and I'm with some other government big shots and everything, and I'm just like, I think at the time I was a student intern or something, but I was working for the government. And I'm walking past the cell block, and I hear this guy yell, "Hey Ed, what are you in for?" Good, buddy. That was kind of embarrassing. I mean, I did have a three-piece suit on, and I had a briefcase, but it didn't seem to help. All right. The only reason I even got into this was so I want you to, in your programming, to have some consideration for some statement about the quality or the image or the feel of the building or something about what it should be like. Because programming quite often leaves that out. It just says, here's a list of rooms, here's how big they need to be, and so on, and that's sort of the end of the story. But I think you have an obligation that goes beyond that, to help guide the designer. And I think, I really believe it's a back and forth with the designer. The designer's on board, the programmer's on board, and they have sort of evolved that aspect of the project almost together if possible. So that you're not excluding the designer from thinking about the nature of the place, or placemaking, or the spirit of the place. But it's a collaboration. And the reason I even think the programmer needs to be part of that is because the programmer becomes so intimate with the user and the client. And so you understand them. You understand where they're coming from, and it's very hard to pass that on to the designer. I mean, ideally, I think the designer and the programmer almost need to be two sides of the same person, where they can be very analytical and very critical thinking, very thorough, very organized while they're being a programmer, and then they turn the switch on and they become an intuitive, creative, feeling, touching designer who's able to go beyond sort of the rational aspects of the project and get into sort of more phenomenological sensibilities about the project. And if that's the same person, that's great, because then there's no loss of information in the transference. But if it's two different individuals, that's where the potential breakdown could be in those kinds of things. The thing that you begin to understand about the client and the user as the programmer sometimes is very hard to even express or define, but is important. Because we can't verbalize everything. We can't verbalize sort of a sense of something or how something feels in many cases. So anyway, that's this part, and now I want to just say a few things about the presentation and the report, and then we'll break up and I'll talk to the first two groups. The whole intent of this, one intent, is to have a document that we could call, this is program for the rebirth of the Stowe Architecture Building. And that's really the report. That's the hard copy thing that I need. And it's partly, to demonstrate that you guys did something in the class. It's also to appease the accreditation people. They're going to come maybe back in a couple of years. And last time we were criticized for not having documentation of programming. So that's the report. Okay, let's do all the numbers. It's the program, the program. I don't need all of your meeting notes. I don't need all that stuff in that report. Okay, so that's what that is. The presentation next week and so on could include your work plan. It could include your meetings. It could include how you came to certain things. But I also want to see parts of the program, or maybe the whole program in its initial form or in its complete form. The objective of that, again, just to say it again, the objective of the presentations is for each team to inform the rest of the class about what they ended up with, what they did along the way, and what they learned from that experience. So we can share it as a kind of a teachable moment for everybody. And so they're very distinctive things. Now, it's possible that the presentation next week, a big part of that presentation is the program, which I kind of expected. And then the thing you hand in the end is that part that's the program. And I also want a digital version, but the digital version could actually be the presentation that you make next week, which is all going to be anyway digital, probably PowerPoint or PDFs or something. And because that record is for me to do a final assessment and think about what kind of grade you should get and kind of a more complete record maybe. So if you already have that underway because of the progress reports that you've been doing, you only did one, I guess, but it's really like that's what I want in that digital thing to hand in. Have I totally confused everybody? That's maybe different than you thought you were doing. Does that create any issue for anybody?
Is it on the 9th?
The 9th, yeah. You weren't here when I said that initially, but it's on PowerPoint. It's on, not PowerPoint, it's on Blackboard. Instead of say Facebook. It's on Blackboard. The 9th is the Monday after jury week. It's exam week. Now you guys really don't have exams, do you? No. So.
5th year's got a jury to do during exam week, so they're not.
You know which day?
What day is our jury at the Harbor Planning?
Oh,
Wednesday. At 8 a.m.
Yeah.
Bright and early.
You have to go to Jackson.
Huh?
No, this is here in Tallahassee.
Yeah, it's there in Frenchtown.
Okay.
At the Renaissance Building.
Okay, we got like 20 minutes left. I want to meet with the two teams that are going on Wednesday. That's team number 1 and 4. Okay.
I have to record after this point?
No, I'm finished.
Okay.